In the year 410 AD, something happened that sent shockwaves across the ancient world. Rome, the eternal city, the heart of the greatest empire humanity had ever seen, was sacked. For 800 years, Rome had stood unconquered. Its legions had crushed kingdoms. Its roads stretched across continents. Its laws shaped civilizations. Yet suddenly, barbarian warriors known as the Goths walked through its gates and looted the city for 3 days. Historians have repeated the same explanation ever since: Rome fell because barbarians destroyed it. But what if that story is wrong? What if the Goths were not the cause of Rome's collapse, but merely the final symptom of something far more dangerous already spreading through the empire? At its peak, the Roman Empire controlled nearly a quarter of the world's population. Its borders stretched from the deserts of the Middle East to the cold forests of Britain. Massive stone roads connected cities thousands of kilometers apart. Aqueducts carried fresh water across valleys. Colosseums towered over urban skylines. To people living in the ancient world, Rome did not look like a civilization that could fall. It looked permanent. It looked invincible. And yet, by the 5th century, cracks had begun appearing everywhere. Legions that once terrified enemies struggled to defend borders. Cities shrank. Trade slowed. Entire regions slipped out of imperial control. Something was draining the strength of the most powerful empire on earth. For centuries, historians searched for the answer. Some blamed barbarian invasions. Others pointed to corrupt emperors or economic collapse. But in recent decades, archaeologists, climate scientists, and medical researchers have uncovered evidence suggesting a far darker possibility. Beneath the surface of Roman history lies a hidden crisis that most ancient writers never fully understood. A crisis that spread silently through cities, armies, and trade routes. A crisis capable of killing millions. Because during the final centuries of Rome's existence, the empire was struck again and again by something far more terrifying than invading armies: disease. Ancient records describe mysterious plagues sweeping through Roman cities. Entire legions reportedly collapsed. Fields were abandoned. Mass graves appeared outside major urban centers. One epidemic during the reign of Emperor Marcus Aurelius may have killed up to 5 million people. Another pandemic 2 centuries later devastated the empire again. Some cities lost half their population in a matter of months. But the true scale of these disasters remained hidden for nearly 2,000 years. Only recently have scientists begun analyzing ancient DNA from Roman burial sites. And what they discovered inside those skeletons has forced historians to reconsider everything we thought we knew about the fall of Rome. Because the real story of Rome's collapse may not be one of invading barbarians or political corruption. It may be the story of an invisible enemy, a microscopic force that traveled silently along Roman roads and trade routes, spreading from city to city faster than armies could march. If that is true, then the Goths did not destroy Rome. They arrived at the ruins of an empire already dying from within. But if disease truly helped bring down the greatest empire of the ancient world, then the next question becomes even more unsettling. What exactly was killing Rome? To understand what really weakened Rome, we must step inside the vast machinery that once powered the empire. Rome was not simply a collection of cities. It was a massive living network. Roads stretched over 400,000 kilometers across 3 continents. Merchant ships crossed the Mediterranean constantly. Grain from Egypt fed millions in Italy. Soldiers moved between provinces at astonishing speed. To the Romans, this connectivity was the secret of their strength. It allowed trade, communication, and military power to flow across unimaginable distances. But hidden inside that same network was something the Romans could not see: a perfect highway for disease. In the year 165 AD, a catastrophe began unfolding inside the Roman world. Soldiers returning from campaigns in the east brought back a mysterious illness. It spread first through military camps, then through cities, then across entire provinces. Victims developed fever, vomiting, skin eruptions, and severe weakness. Within days many were dead. This event became known as the Antonine Plague. Ancient accounts suggest it may have been smallpox, one of the most lethal viruses humanity has ever faced. At its peak, the disease was reportedly killing up to 2,000 people every single day in the city of Rome alone. Imagine the capital of the greatest empire on earth slowly suffocating under a wave of death that no one could stop. But the Antonine Plague was only the beginning. Nearly a century later, another pandemic struck, even more devastating. Known today as the Plague of Cyprian, this disease produced terrifying symptoms: unstoppable diarrhea, blindness, bleeding throats, and limbs that blackened as infections spread through the body. Entire towns were abandoned. Trade routes collapsed. Soldiers died faster than they could be replaced. Roman armies that once dominated battlefields now struggled simply to maintain their numbers. Some historians believe these pandemics reduced the empire's population by as much as 20%. In a world where military power depended on manpower, that loss was catastrophic. But the true danger was not just death. It was the chain reaction that followed. As population shrank, farms went untended. Food shortages appeared. Tax revenues collapsed. Governments struggled to pay soldiers. Borders became vulnerable. Meanwhile, terrified citizens fled cities in search of safety, unknowingly carrying disease with them into new regions. The Roman Empire had become too connected for its own survival. The same roads that allowed armies to move quickly now allowed pathogens to spread faster than any human response. Modern scientists are only beginning to uncover the biological evidence of these disasters. By analyzing ancient DNA from Roman skeletons, researchers have identified genetic traces of pathogens that once ravaged the empire. Some studies suggest multiple diseases were circulating simultaneously: smallpox, measles, and possibly early strains of plague bacteria. In other words, Rome may have faced not one pandemic, but waves of epidemics striking generation after generation. Each outbreak weakened the empire a little more, eroding its population, its economy, and its stability. And then something extraordinary happened. Just as Rome was struggling to recover from centuries of disease and demographic collapse, new groups began appearing along the empire's borders. Desperate migrants fleeing turmoil in distant lands. Among them were the Goths. But they were not simply invading Rome. In many cases, they were seeking refuge inside it. Which raises a disturbing possibility. What if the Goths did not destroy Rome, but walked into an empire that had already begun collapsing under the invisible weight of its own interconnected world? By the early 5th century, the Roman Empire looked powerful on maps, but reality told a different story. Cities that once held hundreds of thousands of people had shrunk dramatically. Vast agricultural lands were abandoned. Entire regions struggled to produce enough food. Roman legions, once the most feared military force on earth, were now understaffed, exhausted, and increasingly composed of foreign recruits. The empire still possessed walls, armies, and emperors. But beneath the surface, something essential had already been lost: the human foundation that made the empire possible. Population is the invisible engine of civilization. It fills the armies, harvests the fields, pays the taxes, and builds the infrastructure that holds societies together. When disease repeatedly tears through a civilization, it doesn't just kill individuals. It slowly dismantles the systems that keep that civilization alive. Rome's plagues did exactly that. Generation after generation faced epidemics that killed soldiers, farmers, merchants, and workers. The empire could rebuild once. It could rebuild twice. But over centuries, the demographic damage accumulated like cracks in a dam. At the same time, forces beyond Rome's borders were shifting. Across Eurasia, massive migrations were underway. Climate instability and conflicts in Central Asia pushed nomadic groups westward. These movements created a chain reaction among tribal societies along the Roman frontier. Tribes displaced by new arrivals began seeking refuge inside the empire's borders. Among them were the Goths, not originally conquerors, but refugees fleeing a violent world beyond Rome's reach. In 376 AD, tens of thousands of Goths crossed the Danube River and entered Roman territory seeking protection. But the empire they entered was no longer the confident superpower it once was. Roman officials struggled to feed and control these massive populations. Corruption, shortages, and fear quickly turned the situation volatile. Tensions exploded into open conflict. In 378 AD, Roman forces confronted Gothic armies at the Battle of Adrianople. The result shocked the ancient world. The Roman army was annihilated. Emperor Valens himself died on the battlefield. It was one of the worst military defeats in Roman history. But the Goths had not destroyed Rome's strength. They had merely exposed how fragile it had already become. Over the following decades, the empire continued to weaken. When the Goths finally entered the city of Rome in 410 AD, the psychological impact was enormous. To the ancient world, it seemed like the fall of civilization itself. But historians now see that moment differently. The sack of Rome was not the collapse. It was the symptom. The empire had been slowly unraveling for centuries, weakened by disease, population loss, economic disruption, and the pressures of a changing world. And there is something deeply unsettling about this story. Because Rome's greatest strength, its vast interconnected system of roads, trade routes, and global exchange, may also have been the mechanism that spread the forces that destroyed it. The empire built a network that united continents. But in doing so, it created pathways for invisible threats that no army could defeat. Civilizations often believe their power makes them permanent. Rome believed that. For centuries, it looked eternal. Yet the fall of Rome reminds us of a humbling truth about human history. Empires are not usually destroyed in a single dramatic moment. They erode slowly, weakened by forces too small to see. And sometimes, the greatest threats to civilization are not the enemies standing outside the gates, but the invisible forces already moving quietly within them.